Daniel Cooper stood at the back of the throne room and tried not to feel small. The ceiling rose so high above him that clouds could have formed there. The pillars were carved from pale stone that seemed to glow with its own light. Everything in the palace was designed to make visitors feel like insects, and it worked perfectly on humans. He had been on this alien world for 3 months now. Earth's government had sent him as part of a diplomatic exchange program with the Galactic Council. The idea was simple. Humans would serve in alien courts, and aliens would serve on Earth. It was supposed to build trust between species, but Daniel had learned quickly that trust was not something they gave easily. They were an ancient species. Their skin was pale blue, almost silver in certain light. Their limbs were long and graceful, and they moved like dancers even when they were just walking across a room. They lived for thousands of years, and they had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. To them, humans were children playing at being a real civilization. Daniel was assigned to the royal guard, but not in any important position. He stood watch during minor court functions. He guarded empty hallways. He was decoration, nothing more. The guards made sure he understood this every single day. "The human is here again," one of them said as Daniel took his position near the eastern door. The guard's name was, and he was 7 feet tall with eyes like polished silver. "Tell me, human, do you ever get tired of pretending to be useful?" Daniel kept his face calm. He had heard worse. "I'm here to serve, same as you." Made a sound that might have been laughter. "You are here because your government begged for a chance to seem important. You will be dead of old age before I finish my morning duties. Your entire species will rise and fall in the time it takes us to read a single book of history." The other guards found this very funny. Daniel said nothing. He had learned that arguing only made things worse. These beings had lived for centuries. They had seen empires rise and fall across 1,000 worlds. To them, a human was barely worth noticing. But Daniel noticed things too. He noticed that the palace security was full of gaps. They relied on tradition and ceremony instead of practical defense. They positioned guards where guards had always been positioned, even if those positions made no tactical sense. They trusted that their reputation would protect them, that no one would dare attack the ancient and powerful empire. Daniel had filed 7 reports about the security problems. All 7 had been ignored. His superior, a commander named, had told him that humans saw threats everywhere because they came from a violent world. They had evolved beyond such primitive thinking. Daniel did not argue. He just kept watching and learning. Princess entered the throne room and everyone fell silent. She was the youngest daughter of Queen, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never known fear or want. Her skin was a deeper blue than most, almost the color of a clear ocean. Her eyes were gold, and they seemed to see everything at once. Daniel had seen her many times but had never spoken to her. Royal family members did not speak to minor guards, especially not alien ones. But he had noticed that she was different from the others. She asked questions. She listened to answers. She did not dismiss people simply because they were beneath her station. Queen had warned her daughter about humans. Daniel had overheard the conversation once, standing guard outside a private chamber. The Queen had said that humans were unpredictable creatures, driven by emotions they could not control. They lived such short lives that they made decisions without thinking of consequences. They were dangerous not because they were strong, but because they did not understand their own weakness. Had listened to her mother, but Daniel had seen the curiosity in her eyes. She wanted to understand the strange creatures from the violent little world called Earth. Today the palace was preparing for an important event. A delegation from the Dominion was arriving for diplomatic talks. They were not like they were brutal and aggressive, known across the galaxy for their expansion tactics. They conquered worlds and stripped them of resources. They made treaties only when it suited them and broke those treaties the moment they saw advantage in doing so. Daniel watched the ships land from his position near the window. The vessels were dark and angular, built for war even when they carried diplomats. He counted the soldiers who emerged and noted their weapons. They saw a diplomatic visit. Daniel saw a threat assessment. The delegation entered the palace with false smiles and empty words of friendship. Their leader was Ambassador, a massive creature with dark red skin and 4 arms. His eyes never stopped moving, scanning the room, measuring distances, evaluating defenses. Daniel recognized that look. He had seen it in soldiers preparing for battle. Paid special attention to Princess. His gaze lingered on her too long, returning to her again and again throughout the welcoming ceremony. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had learned to trust his instincts. They had kept him alive through 2 wars on Earth and 3 peacekeeping missions on colony worlds. Right now, his instincts were screaming. He filed another report that evening. He described behavior in detail. He outlined his concerns about the ambassador's interest in the princess. He requested additional security for the upcoming welcome banquet. Commander read the report in front of him and then set it aside. You see threats in shadows, human. They would never risk war by harming a member of our royal family. The consequences would be devastating for them. With respect, Commander, that is exactly what they want you to believe. Silver eyes grew cold. You have been here 3 months. I have served the crown for 400 years. Do not presume to lecture me about threats to this empire. Daniel left the commander's office knowing that his report would join the others in whatever place ignored documents went to die. But he could not shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. He could not explain it with logic or evidence. He just knew. That night he made a decision. The welcome banquet was tomorrow. He was not assigned to work the event. Guards of his low rank were not permitted at royal functions, but he was going anyway. He would find a position near the princess and watch. If he was wrong, no one would ever know he was there. If he was right, at least he would be close enough to act. Daniel checked his equipment and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would either prove him a fool or prove him right. He was not sure which outcome frightened him more. The great hall blazed with light. Thousands of crystal fixtures hung from the ceiling, each one holding a captured star that they had harvested from dying solar systems. The effect was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Daniel had never seen anything like it on Earth. He had positioned himself near a service corridor where the servants entered and exited with food and drinks. It was not a guard position, but it gave him a clear view of the entire hall. He could see the raised platform where Queen sat on her throne. He could see the long tables where dignitaries from a dozen species ate and drank and pretended to enjoy each other's company. Most importantly, he could see Princess as she moved through the crowd. The princess was performing her duties perfectly. She smiled at the right moments. She laughed at jokes that were not funny. She made every guest feel important and valued. It was a skill that took centuries to master, and she had learned it before she turned 200 years old. Daniel watched Ambassador from the corner of his eye. The diplomat was seated at a table near the center of the hall, surrounded by his delegation. He ate little and drank less. His 4 arms rested on the table, perfectly still, but his eyes followed the princess everywhere she went. An hour passed. Then, too, Daniel began to wonder if he had been wrong. Perhaps was simply curious about royalty. Perhaps the interest meant nothing. Perhaps Daniel really did see threats in shadows, just like Commander said. Then the princess began walking toward his position. Daniel straightened instinctively. She was not looking at him. She was greeting guests along the way, stopping to exchange words with ambassadors and nobles. But her path was bringing her closer and closer to where he stood. She stopped 3 feet away from him and turned. Her golden eyes met his and he saw amusement there. "You are the human guard," she said. "Daniel Cooper." He was surprised she knew his name. "Yes, Princess." "This is not your assigned position. Guards of your rank are not permitted at royal functions." Her voice was calm, almost playful. "Why are you here?" Daniel considered lying. It would be safer, but something in her eyes made him tell the truth. "I am concerned about Ambassador. His interest in you seems unusual. I wanted to be close in case something happened." Tilted her head slightly. "You believe a diplomat would attack me in the middle of a royal banquet, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses and the entire palace guard? I believe he is watching you too carefully. I believe his body language suggests preparation rather than relaxation. I believe something is wrong." The princess studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was a real smile, not the practiced one she used for diplomats. "You worry too much, Daniel Cooper. They are unpleasant, but they are not foolish. An attack on royalty would bring war. They cannot afford war with us." "That is what everyone keeps telling me." "Because it is true." She started to turn away, then paused. "But I appreciate your concern. It is refreshing to meet someone who takes their duty seriously, even when that duty is small." Daniel wanted to argue. He wanted to make her understand the danger he sensed. But she was already walking away, moving toward another group of guests who required her attention. He had done what he could. He had warned her. Now all he could do was watch. 20 minutes later, Ambassador rose from his table. Daniel felt his muscles tense, was moving through the crowd slowly, greeting other guests, accepting compliments on his speech from earlier. But his path was calculated. Daniel could see the pattern. The ambassador was working his way toward the princess. Stood near a tall window, speaking with a trade minister from one of the colony worlds. She did not notice approaching. Why would she? A diplomat walking through a banquet was not unusual. There was no reason for alarm. But Daniel saw the way, upper right arm stayed pressed against his side. He saw the slight bulge beneath the ambassador's formal robes. He saw the change in its breathing as the distance closed. Daniel was already moving when reached the princess. "Your Highness," said, his voice smooth and friendly, "I wanted to offer my personal greetings before the evening ended." Turned with a polite smile. "Ambassador, I am honored by your attention." His upper right arm moved. Time seemed to slow down. Daniel saw the weapon emerge from beneath the robes. It was a neural disruptor, a device specifically designed to kill by overloading their nervous systems. One blast would stop the princess's heart instantly. There would be no survival. There would be no recovery. His arm came up. The weapon pointed at its chest. Her golden eyes widened as she understood what was happening, but there was no time to move, no time to scream, no time to do anything except die. Daniel threw himself between them. The disruptor fired. The blast hit Daniel square in the chest. Pain exploded through his body like nothing he had ever felt. Every nerve ending screamed at once. His vision went white, then red, then black. He felt himself falling but could not control his limbs. He heard screaming from somewhere far away. The weapon had been calibrated for biology. It was designed to destroy their delicate nervous systems with a single pulse. But humans were different. Humans came from a world where everything was trying to kill them. Their bodies were built to survive damage that would destroy other species. Daniel did not die instantly. Instead, the energy tore through his body in ways the weapon's designers had never intended. His heart stopped. His lungs seized. His spine took the brunt of the damage as the energy sought ground. But his brain kept functioning long enough for one final thought. He hoped the princess was safe. Chaos erupted throughout the hall. Guards swarmed before he could fire again. The delegation tried to flee but found every exit blocked. Screams filled the air as guests scrambled away from the violence. Dropped to her knees beside Daniel. His eyes were open but empty. Blood leaked from his nose and ears. His chest was not moving. "Help him," she screamed. "Someone help him." Healers rushed forward. They worked frantically, using techniques designed for their own species because there was no human medical knowledge in the palace. They restarted his heart twice. They kept oxygen flowing to his brain. They did everything they could with tools that were never meant for human bodies. Queen appeared through the crowd, her face pale with shock and rage. She looked at her daughter, unharmed and trembling. Then she looked at the human on the floor, broken and dying. "Who did this?" she demanded. "Who saved my child?" "The human guard," someone answered. He threw himself in front of the weapon. The queen stood motionless for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice carried throughout the silent hall. "Take him to the Royal Medical Wing. Bring every healer in the Empire if you must. This human will not die, not while I rule, not ever." The healers lifted Daniel's ruined body and carried him away. Followed, still shaking, unable to believe what had just happened. A creature who lived for barely a century had sacrificed himself for someone who would live for thousands of years. It made no sense by any calculation. But humans, she was beginning to understand, did not make calculations. They simply acted. Daniel drifted through darkness for 3 days. Sometimes he heard voices speaking in languages he did not understand. Sometimes he felt hands touching him, adjusting tubes, checking monitors. Sometimes he dreamed of Earth, of green forests and blue oceans, and a sky that held only one sun. The Royal Medical Wing was the finest healing facility in the Empire. It had equipment that could rebuild organs from single cells. It had medicines that could cure diseases humans had never even named. But all of it had been designed for bodies. Human physiology was a mystery to the healers who worked desperately to keep Daniel alive. They improvised. They experimented. They consulted ancient texts about other species and tried to apply what they learned. Every hour that Daniel survived was a small miracle. Every breath he took was a victory against death itself. Queen came to his bedside every morning and every evening. She stood in silence, watching the monitors, listening to the healer's reports. The court was shocked by her behavior. A queen did not attend to commoners. A queen certainly did not attend to aliens, especially ones from primitive species like humans, but did not care what the court thought. She stood vigil because something inside her demanded it. Princess struggled with guilt that threatened to consume her. She had dismissed Daniel's warnings. She had called him paranoid. She had walked away from him moments before the attack, leaving him no choice but to throw himself into danger. If she had listened, guards could have been positioned properly. If she had trusted the human's instincts, none of this would have happened. She spent hours in the palace library, reading everything she could find about humans. Their biology was fascinating and terrifying. They came from a world where the gravity was crushing, the climate was violent, and nearly every creature was either predator or prey. Humans had evolved to survive conditions that would kill most species in days. Their bodies healed faster than. Their pain tolerance was remarkable. Their endurance was legendary across the galaxy. But even human bodies had limits. The neural disruptor had done terrible damage. The healers said Daniel might never wake up, and if he did wake up, he might never walk again. Across the Empire, news of the assassination attempt spread like fire. The Dominion any official involvement. They claimed Ambassador had acted alone, driven by personal madness rather than orders from his government. No one believed this story, but no one could prove otherwise. Galactic tensions rose as the demanded justice, and they offered only empty apologies. But another story spread alongside the political crisis. A human had saved the princess. A creature from a young and violent world had thrown himself in front of a weapon designed to kill instantly. He had absorbed an attack that should have ended him, and somehow he was still alive. Other species began to look at humanity differently. They began to wonder what else they had underestimated about the short-lived beings from the death world called Earth. On the fourth day, Daniel opened his eyes. The room was white and quiet. Soft lights glowed from panels in the ceiling. Machines hummed beside his bed, connected to his body by dozens of thin tubes. He tried to move his arms and found that they responded slowly, as if underwater. He tried to move his legs and felt nothing at all. A healer noticed his open eyes and rushed to his side. More healers followed, checking readings, adjusting equipment, speaking rapidly in. Daniel could not understand most of what they said, but he understood enough. "The princess," he managed to say. His voice was rough and weak. "Is she safe?" The healers exchanged glances. They had never encountered a patient whose first words after near death were about someone else. A senior healer leaned close and spoke in careful standard Galactic. "The princess is unharmed. You saved her life." Daniel closed his eyes and let out a long breath. He had done his job. Everything else was secondary. The door opened and Queen entered. The healers stepped back instantly, bowing their heads. The Queen approached the bed and looked down at Daniel with an expression he could not read. He tried to sit up to show proper respect, but his body would not obey. "Do not strain yourself," the Queen said. "You have earned the right to rest." "Your Majesty," Daniel forced the words out. "I apologize for attending the banquet without permission. It was not my place." Made a sound that might have been laughter. "You apologize for saving my daughter's life. Humans truly are strange creatures." She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. This was unheard of. Queens did not sit beside commoners, but seemed unconcerned with tradition at the moment. "Among my people, a life debt is the most sacred obligation that exists," she said. "You saved the life of my child. You sacrificed yourself without hesitation, knowing that the weapon would likely kill you. This creates a debt that cannot be measured in currency or titles or lands." Daniel shook his head weakly. "I was just doing my job. Any guard would have done the same." "No," said firmly. "They would not. I have seen the reports you filed. I know how many times you warned Commander about security concerns. I know how many times you were ignored and dismissed. Any other guard would have accepted the situation. You refused. You put yourself in position to act because you knew no one else would listen." She leaned forward slightly. "Why? You owe nothing to my people. We have treated you with contempt since you arrived. You had every reason to step back and let events unfold. Why did you risk your life for a princess who barely knew your name?" Daniel thought about the question for a long moment. "Because it was the right thing to do. On Earth we have a saying, 'Do what is right, not what is easy.' I saw a threat. I had the power to stop it. Everything else was just noise. The queen studied him with those ancient eyes. She had lived for thousands of years. She had seen empires rise and fall across the galaxy, but she had never met anyone quite like this human. "The healers tell me your injuries are severe," she said quietly. "The neural disruptor damaged your spine. They have done everything possible, but they believe you will never walk again without assistance." Daniel absorbed this information in silence. He had suspected as much. He could feel nothing below his waist. The emptiness there was answer enough. "I see," he said finally. "Thank you for telling me directly, Your Majesty. You accept this news without anger, without despair. Being angry will not help me walk. Feeling sorry for myself will not change what happened." Daniel managed a small smile. "Humans are good at adapting. We have to be. Our lives are too short to waste on things we cannot change." Queen rose from her chair. She looked down at Daniel with something new in her eyes, something that might have been respect. "I will gather the finest medical minds in the Empire," she said. "I will offer unlimited resources to anyone who can find a way to heal you. You gave my daughter her future. I will give you yours." She left without waiting for a response. Daniel lay in the quiet room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything he had lost, but he also thought about everything he had gained. He had saved a life. He had done what was right. Whatever came next, nothing could take that away. Daniel began rehabilitation on the 7th day. The healers had stabilized his condition, but they warned him that recovery would be slow and painful. They did not understand human stubbornness. They did not know that Daniel Cooper had never accepted impossible in his entire life. He started with small movements, lifting his arms, turning his head, gripping objects with his fingers. The healers were impressed by his determination but skeptical about his chances. The neural disruptor had caused damage they had never seen before. Human spines were not designed to absorb that kind of energy. By every medical calculation, Daniel should have been dead. But humans had a habit of ignoring calculations. Queen kept her promise. She summoned the greatest medical minds from across the empire. Scientists arrived from distant colonies, carrying research that had never been shared beyond their own laboratories. They studied Daniel's body with fascination and horror. His physiology was brutal compared to. His muscles were dense and powerful. His bones were thick and heavy. His entire system was built for a world that tried to kill its inhabitants every single day. Princess began visiting Daniel every afternoon. At first, their conversations were awkward. She did not know how to talk to someone who had sacrificed so much for her. He did not know how to talk to royalty without feeling like he was intruding. But slowly, over days and weeks, they found a rhythm. She taught him about history. The empire was older than human civilization itself. Her ancestors had been building starships when humans were still discovering fire. They had made contact with dozens of species across the galaxy, some peaceful and some not. The Dominion was just the latest threat in a long line of enemies who had tried to challenge power. Daniel taught her card games from Earth. Simple games with paper cards and complex strategies. Found them fascinating. Games were elegant and ancient, based on mathematics and probability. Human games were messy and unpredictable, based on reading opponents and taking risks. She won more often than he did, but he surprised her sometimes with moves she never saw coming. "You think differently than we do," she said one afternoon, studying the cards in her hand. "Analyze every possibility before acting. Humans seem to make decisions based on instinct and emotion." "Not just emotion," Daniel said. "Experience too. When you live a short life, you learn to trust your gut. You do not always have time to calculate every outcome." "Is that why you jumped in front of the weapon? Instinct?" Daniel considered the question. "Partly, but also training. I have been in dangerous situations before. Your body learns to react before your mind catches up. By the time I understood what I was doing, I was already moving." Set down her cards and looked at him directly. "Do you regret it? You may never walk again because of what you did for me." "No," Daniel said without hesitation. "I would do it again. Your life is worth more than my legs." "My life is worth more because I am a princess." "Your life is worth more because you are a person who will live for thousands of years and do countless good things. My legs are just legs. They can be replaced or worked around. A life cannot." Did not know how to respond to this. She had been raised to believe that royal blood made her valuable. She had never met someone who valued her simply because she was alive. A breakthrough came in the fourth week. A scientist named Advisor proposed an experimental treatment. It combined regeneration technology with human stem cell therapy. The two approaches had never been used together before. There was no guarantee it would work. There was a significant chance it would make things worse. Daniel agreed immediately. The treatment was painful beyond anything he had experienced before. The healers had to restart the growth process multiple times when his body rejected the foreign technology. Daniel gritted his teeth and endured. He had survived worse. He had survived the disruptor blast itself. He would survive this too. The Galactic Council sent a human ambassador named Hayes to check on Daniel's condition. She arrived expecting to find a dying man in an alien hospital. Instead, she found a recovering patient who was actively helping to redesign the palace security protocols. "You have been busy," said, sitting beside his bed and reviewing the documents he had prepared. "Listen to me now," Daniel replied. "I figured I should use that while I can. Their security is still full of holes. The assassination attempt proved that. The guards who mocked you before, they take your advice now. Some of them, Commander still does not like me much, but the younger guards are curious. They want to understand how humans saw what they missed." Shook her head in amazement. "You realize what you have done, right? This is the biggest shift in human relations in decades. One act of courage changed how they see our entire species." Daniel shrugged. "I was not trying to change anything. I was just trying to keep someone from getting killed." "That is exactly why it worked. You were not playing politics. You were just being human." The weeks passed. Daniel's legs began to respond to the treatment. First came tingling sensations, then pain, then the ability to move his toes. The healers were astonished. They had hoped for minor improvement at best. Instead, they were witnessing something close to miraculous. Daniel worked harder than any patient they had ever seen. He pushed himself past the point of exhaustion every single day. When the healers told him to rest, he rested for exactly as long as required and then started again. Human determination, they began to understand, was not a myth. It was a survival trait forged on a world that gave no second chances. Queen visited on the day Daniel took his first steps without assistance. The healing chamber was quiet except for the soft hum of medical equipment. Daniel stood between two support rails, his legs trembling but holding his weight. He looked up at the Queen and smiled. "Your Majesty," he said, "thank you for giving me this chance." Watched him take one step, then another. Her ancient eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, though rarely showed such emotion. "You have given my empire more than protection," she said quietly. "You have given us a reminder that courage has no species, that determination can overcome any obstacle, that sometimes the smallest creatures can do the greatest things." Daniel reached the end of the rails and turned around. His legs ached. His spine felt like fire, but he was standing, he was walking, he was alive. "I am just a guard," he said. "I was doing my job." "No," the Queen replied. "You are a bridge between worlds, and I think your job is only beginning." 6 months had passed since the night Daniel threw himself in front of a weapon meant to kill a princess. The palace had changed since then. The security protocols had changed, and Daniel's place within the empire had changed most of all. He no longer stood guard in empty hallways. He no longer took orders from commanders who dismissed his reports. Now he sat in council chambers where the fate of nations was decided. He advised generals who had been fighting wars since before humanity discovered fire. He had become something no human had ever been before, a trusted voice in the empire. But peace was becoming harder to maintain. The Dominion had not forgotten their humiliation. The failed assassination had embarrassed them across the galaxy. Other species now saw them as clumsy and weak, unable to complete even a simple killing. They responded the only way they knew how. They became more aggressive. Border incidents increased every week. Warships tested defenses, pushing deeper into neutral territory with each pass. Trade routes were disrupted. Colony worlds reported of scouts in their systems. Everyone knew what was coming. War seemed inevitable. Queen convened a council of war in the great hall where Daniel had once stood watch as the lowest guard in the palace. Now he sat at the central table, surrounded by admirals and generals and advisors who had lived for centuries. They listened when he spoke. They valued his perspective. It still felt strange to him, but he had learned to accept it. "They will attack within 3 months," Admiral reported. The old warrior had commanded the fleet for 400 years. Their fleet movements are unmistakable. They are positioning for a strike at our outer colonies. Can we defend those colonies? The Queen asked. We can try, but our military has not fought a major conflict in centuries. We have maintained our fleet out of tradition, not necessity. They have been at war constantly. Their tactics are brutal but effective. Daniel listened to the discussion with growing concern. They were powerful, but they were also proud. They believed their ancient technology and superior culture would prevail against any enemy. They did not understand that war was not about technology or culture. War was about will, and they had will in abundance. Your Majesty, Daniel said when there was a pause in the debate, may I offer a suggestion? The admirals looked at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to annoyance. A human speaking in a war council was still unusual, but the Queen nodded for him to continue. Earth has a military. It is not as large or as advanced as yours, but it is experienced. We have been fighting wars against each other and against hostile species since we left our. We know how to adapt, how to improvise, how to survive against superior forces. Admiral frowned. You suggest we ask humans for help. Your species has been in space for barely 2 centuries. We have been fighting for our entire existence, Daniel replied calmly. Every human alive today is descended from survivors. We come from a world that tried to kill us constantly. That experience matters more than technology. He is right, Princess spoke from her seat beside the Queen. I have studied human history these past months. They have faced extinction many times. They have always found a way to survive. We should not dismiss that simply because they are young. The council fell into heated debate. Some admirals saw wisdom in Daniel's suggestion. Others were offended by the idea of asking a primitive species for military assistance. There had been a great power when humans were living in caves. How could they now ask those same humans for protection? Queen listened to all arguments before raising her hand for silence. The hall fell quiet instantly. 6 months ago, she said, I watched a human throw himself in front of a weapon to save my daughter. He did not calculate the odds. He did not consider whether a human life was worth a life. He simply acted because acting was right. That is exactly the kind of ally we need against the. She turned to Daniel. Contact your government. Propose a formal alliance between humanity and the Empire. If they agree, we will welcome human advisors and a defense fleet into our space. It will be the first military partnership between Earth and an elder species. Daniel felt the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders. This was bigger than saving one princess. This was the future of 2 civilizations. I will make the contact tonight, Your Majesty. Word of the proposed alliance spread quickly. The Dominion watched with growing unease. They had planned their war against the carefully. They knew tactics, weaknesses, patterns of thought, but humans were unknown. Humans came from a death world. Humans fought with unpredictable ferocity and refused to surrender even when defeat was certain. The military commanders argued about what this alliance might mean. Some dismissed humans as irrelevant. Others remembered the failed assassination and the human guard who had absorbed a killing blow and somehow survived. That single act had disrupted all their plans. What might happen if thousands of such humans joined the war? Ambassador Hayes arrived 2 weeks later to formalize the treaty. She brought documents and diplomats and a small fleet of human warships that took position alongside vessels. The sight of the 2 fleets flying together sent a message across the galaxy. Humanity had found an ally among the elder species. The rules of galactic politics had changed. Found Daniel in the palace gardens on the evening before the signing ceremony. He was walking alone, still moving carefully but without assistance. The medical treatments had worked better than anyone expected. He would never be as fast as before, but he would never stop either. You understand what you have done, right? Asked, falling into step beside him. Saved a princess, got myself nearly killed, started limping for the rest of my life. More than that, you changed how the galaxy sees humanity. One act of selfless courage accomplished what decades of diplomacy could not. The elder species always saw us as children, too young and too emotional to take seriously. Now they see us as something else, something they had forgotten existed. What is that? Heroes smiled. They forgot that some species still produce heroes, individuals who sacrifice themselves not for power or glory but simply because it is right. You reminded them. Daniel looked up at the sky full of unfamiliar stars. Somewhere out there, Earth was spinning around its single sun, filled with billions of humans who had no idea what had happened here. He wondered if they would ever understand. "I was just doing my job," he said quietly. "Keep telling yourself that. The rest of us know better." The signing ceremony took place the next morning in the Great Hall. Daniel stood beside Princess and Queen as representatives from both species put their names to the alliance documents. Human ambassadors and nobles watched together. Two civilizations, separated by thousands of years of development, joined by a single act of courage. Queen addressed the gathering when the signing was complete. Her voice carried through the hall and across countless communication channels to every corner of the galaxy. "Empire has stood for, we have seen species rise and fall. We have weathered countless storms, but in our long history we had forgotten something important. We had forgotten what true courage looks like. We had forgotten that sacrifice is the highest form of service." A human reminded us, a guard who stood watch in our halls, dismissed and ignored by those who should have valued him. He saw a threat we could not see. He acted when no one else would. He gave us back something we had lost. She turned to look at Daniel directly. "Today we sign an alliance with humanity, but this alliance is not about politics or military power. It is about recognition. Recognition that the youngest species in the galaxy may have the most to teach the oldest. We will stand with humanity for as long as the stars burn, not because we owe them a debt, though we do, but because they are worthy allies. They are worthy friends." Daniel listened to the applause that filled the hall. He saw humans and standing together, speaking together, beginning to understand each other. He had come to this world as the lowest guard in the palace. Now he stood at the center of history. But inside, he was still just Daniel Cooper, a man who had seen something wrong and decided to make it right. That was all any human could do. That was all any human needed to do. The stars waited outside the windows, vast and ancient and full of possibility. Humanity was just beginning its journey among them, and wherever that journey led, they would not walk alone.